Imagine this. You walk into a bookstore looking for a new thriller to read. Browsing through the shelves with dark covers and intriguing titles, you decide to go for the new Stephen King. Suddenly, the salesperson approaches you with a great smile. Stephen King, wonderful choice. I have another book to recommend to you that I'm sure you will love. Intrigued, you follow them, only to end up with a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird in your hands. If you like American literature, says the salesperson, I'm sure you'll love this. Sounds absurd, right? But that's exactly what happened to a journalist Judith von Berg when she was recommended a book by an Austrian author about the life in the Alps just because she picked up the book by an Italian author about female friendship. Those two books had nothing in common, apart from the fact that they were both labeled translated literature. In her article, Translated Fiction is Not a Genre, Why Do Bookshops Tell Us It Is?, she explores how stories written in other languages are being grouped together for no other reasons than being foreign. And honestly, this label has always confused me. Just like the Made in Europe category on streaming services, it tries to squeeze completely unrelated stories into the same box just because they weren't written in English. English is not my native language, but I have been following English-speaking literary resources for many years. And I have always been wondering, why does it feel like an English-speaking book community, and BookTube in particular, often singles out international literature? This question has been haunting me lately, and that is why I made this video to unpack it. First of all, not much translated literature is being read by English speakers. Probably it's because not much being published in the first place. Only about 3% of books released each year by English publishers are translations. Please compare this with 27% in France, 40% in Turkey, and 70% in Slovenia. I won't go into detail about all the well-known reasons for why we should read translated literature or get familiar with literature or other art from different cultures, because I'm sure you're aware of these reasons. Expanding our perspectives, building empathy, challenging colonial mindsets, or simply rediscovering what stories can be. And I do think that all of those reasons are valid, but I don't want this video to be preachy or to push you to go and read foreign literature just because this is your cultural homework now. What I'm aiming to do is, well, first of all, to explore the reason why English speakers don't seem to read internationally that much. Because as someone who was not an English speaker, or at least not a fluent English speaker, until about the age of 2025, until that age, I read most of my literature in translation if it didn't come from my country. So for me, the concept of translated literature was never really a thing. So to find out why some people might choose not to read translated literature, I turned to the most credible source of human opinion, Reddit, and discovered two main reasons. Reason 1. The translation isn't the real thing. Many readers believe they're missing something if they read the translation, probably the unique style of writing or some expressions that just simply cannot be translated to their native language. But as someone who, as I mentioned, has read most literature in translation until about I was 20, you'll never know what you're missing. Other bad translations? Absolutely. But there are also cases like Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, where the author himself admitted that he preferred the English translation done by Gregory Rabassa to the original text. Translation is not imitation, it's interpretation, it's art, and I do believe that we need to give translators a little bit more credit. And what I'm trying to do now is not only remember the name of the author when I'm reading the translated book, but also the name of the translator. The one that I just mentioned translated quite a few books from Spanish to English, and I know that he's good because Gabriel Garcia Marquez said he's good. So now, if I see his name as a translator somewhere, I know that that translation is going to be fabulous. Reason 2, it's not relatable. Many readers and publishers say that international stories might not feel relatable to the English speaking audience. And okay, I sure get that. We all come from different cultural backgrounds, we have different values, different mentality, we were raised differently. But it just makes me think about my favorite show when I was growing up, when I was a kid of about 6, 7 years old. It was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. As a little kid in Ukraine, not much about that show was relatable to me. I wasn't in high school, and even if I were, our high schools don't have lockers or sport clubs. We had to wear uniforms at school, and our libraries were definitely not that fancy and weren't run by mysterious British professors. You know what, also, our schools didn't have vampires. But somehow it was my favorite show. Probably because I was the new kid at school, just like Buffy, or because it was the great story about friendship and had a strong female lead, or maybe it was just so entertaining for me at that age. Because good stories aren't about cultural specifics, they're about characters, relationships, connections, emotions, adventures. Relatability is not geography, it's humanity. So, we've established the reasons why some English speakers might choose not to read translated literature or foreign or international literature. I'm using these words interchangeably. But even when they do, I feel like it is often set apart in the media. It's like with the word woman. You have sports and you have women's sports. You have literature and you have translated literature. The label creates a false sense of these books being somehow very different from the books that were originally written in English. Probably they're harder or less relatable, less accessible. But think about this, when you were reading Cinderella or Little Red Riding Hood or The Little Prince when you were little, have you ever thought about these books as translations? They actually are. They were not originally written in English. But no, you didn't think of it because probably, well, you didn't know, you were a kid, but also because they were just good stories. And that's what literature is, good stories. Yet, bookstores and especially bookstore websites are still grouping together literature from Morocco, Germany, Japan, and Colombia as translated literature as if they were the same genre. They're not. It's not a literally genre, it's the logistical category. I also see a lot of terms like French literature or Indian literature, or even worse, European literature or African literature in a category genre on Goodreads. It's not really a genre, and we definitely cannot group the literature of one whole continent together. And of course, it kind of makes sense if we're talking about the historical context or cultural context, but not when we're talking about genre. We don't really say I don't like English literature after one disappointing British novel, but I heard people saying I don't like Asian literature after struggling with one 600-page Chinese historical epic. And the language that we use to talk about these books, the labels that we put on them, they matter. Because language always matters. It can create certain narratives. As a wonderful author, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie once said in her interview, when people hear African literature, they often perceive it not as an art, not as a literature, but as anthropology. Because somehow the term African literature, that is supposed to literally mean literature written on the territory of an African continent, is being perceived as a genre.
And of course, it's not just an English speaking book community issue. In many places in the world, bookstores lump 50 countries into one African literature shelf, while for some reason giving cozy crime its separate section. What does cozy crime even mean? I digress. So, even if these books are actually being read, they are often perceived as anthropology or history or cultural homework, and the authors of foreign books are often perceived as not individuals but representatives of their respective countries. And here we can fall into the trap of a danger of a single story, which is a title of, again, amazing Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk. And in this TED Talk, she told a story about one reader who approached her after reading her novel Purple Hibiscus and expressed their sympathy for poor Nigerian women being married to very violent men, which is a conclusion that the reader reached after reading the novel. And the author's reaction was wonderful.
I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho. And and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers.
This way of reading, as if one book equals one culture, isn't just absurd, it's dangerous. It creates the illusion of understanding while strengthening the stereotypes. Yes, certain themes definitely dominate specific moments in history and specific regions. For example, if you look at the literature from my country, Ukraine, that has been written throughout the last 3 to 4 years, most of it it's going to be about the war. But it doesn't mean that Ukrainian literature is war literature. We have fantasy, satire, love stories, 900-page sci fi novels, but those rarely get translated because publishers choose what they think the world expects from us: war fiction. And it has been like this since the beginning of the war in 2014. Why? Because it sells, because it's familiar, because it's expected. So, what's the point? When we call something translated literature, we turn an act of connection into a label of separation. Translation should be a bridge and not a border. The language of a story, it shouldn't define how accessible, difficult, valuable, or relatable it is. Because storytelling at its core is human and not national. So maybe it's time we stop treating translated literature as a genre and start reading it as what it actually is: literature. The reason why I decided to choose this topic for my first video on this channel is the Read Around the World challenge that I recently started. For those who don't know, it's the challenge when you attempt to read the book from every single country in the world. And I have wanted to do this for a while. I wanted to broaden my horizons, and I spent a lot of time looking for inspiration and book recommendations, and I also will, of course, appreciate them from you. And while looking for this information, I came across a lot of wonderful creators, but also across many people who approach this challenge as a cultural checklist. And I want to do it slightly differently. So, in my next video, I'll show you how I'm setting up my Read Around the World challenge: the rules, the tools, and the mistakes that I've already made because I started this challenge like a month ago, already read 7 books from different countries. So, if this topic resonates with you and you would like to read more internationally and you're also interested in videos like this, subscribe and come travel the world with me, one story at a time.